You're woken in the night by the hatch to the attic being splintered open. Members of your family shriek in horror as men in long black coats pour into the enclosed space, barking furious orders in German and brandishing their pistols menacingly. On the lapels of their coats, the terrifying double lightning bolts of the SS gleam in the glow of their flashlights. This is yet another detachment charged with hunting down undesirables in Nazi-occupied territory. And despite years of hiding away, your luck has just run out. You and your family are manhandled out of the attic and dragged out into the street, kicking and screaming, before being tossed into the back of a military vehicle at gunpoint. If you try to escape, they'll kill you. But death may be a reprieve compared to what awaits you in the horrors of a Nazi concentration camp. As a Jew or one of the other many minority groups persecuted by the Nazis in the 1930s and 40s, if you were caught by the SS or the Gestapo, you were generally persecuted, beaten, captured, and then sent to a concentration camp. While the possibility of you being snatched off the streets for the simple crime of being a Jew is already a concern, what's more haunting is you never can tell when it'll happen. Your journey to a Nazi concentration camp is never a single clear-cut or straightforward route. It twists and it turns, influenced by your background and the shifting whims of the Nazi regime's arbitrary quota. To reiterate, perhaps you find yourself here because of your ties to groups opposing the Nazis, communists, socialists, trade unionists, or anyone suspected of dissent. Or maybe you were deemed undesirable for the Nazis' vision of society, homeless, homosexual, mentally ill, petty criminal, or simply seen as unproductive. Some unfortunate souls ended up here through random mass arrests when they were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Others faced imprisonment for their religious beliefs, like Jehovah's Witnesses, who refused to bow to the new order. Or maybe you're simply one of the primary targets of Hitler's brimming hatred, a member of the Jewish faith and ethnicity, considered worth nothing more than the gum beneath a German boot. Even the journey to the camp is designed to rob you of your humanity and to instill fear and shame, to terrify you regardless of who you are. Man, woman, young, old, healthy, or sick. The arrival process is meant to crush your spirit, subjecting you to unimaginable abuse, all part of a system that seeks to dehumanize or destroy. The Nazis will do anything to break you. Once taken, you're forcefully loaded into vehicles, whether trains or trucks, and transported to a concentration camp chosen by the soldiers. In this vehicle, you'll meet other Jews of all ages, cowering in fear, eyes filled with terror. There's barely enough space in the vehicle, and chances are there will either be a very small window or no window at all. You are denied water, food, and even the basic decency of toilet facilities. If you or the many other prisoners crammed in the tight space like animals need to relieve yourself, you're provided a bucket and nothing more. Without food or water, you're starved and dehydrated, stuck in a claustrophobic square, filled with the smell of vomit, excrement, and the tangy smell of dread. The uncertainty of where you're being forcefully taken to grips you like a vice you cannot extricate yourself from. This journey you're forced on can take days, filled with suffering and an inability to do anything in the face of anxiety and terror that comes from the void of genocidal tyranny. Sometimes being transported in overcrowded freight cars often meant you lost sight of family members who were also captured along with you. Worse still, there's no hope whatsoever that you'll cross paths ever again. Perhaps they die in transit. Perhaps they're executed by the trigger-hungry German soldiers. Perhaps they simply get sent to a different camp. The truth is, you may never find out. You're also never told where you're being sent to. The situational blindness makes the entire process even scarier. If you were arrested in the later part of the Holocaust, you probably have heard rumors of concentration camps in the East. If you were privy to that information, maybe you already knew what your fate was. Maybe you were already aware of the dreadful living conditions awaiting you in the infamous East. Regardless of what you know, you can do nothing but wait with dread and painful agitation. Still, nothing can prepare you for the misfortune that waited for you within the barbed wire fences of the concentration camps. Like the many unfortunate souls being walked to Nazi concentration camps, the transport itself felt like a march towards certain death. However, whether by a stroke of bad luck or mercy, you or some other prisoners tightly packed into the airless freight vehicles or trucks may not make it to the dreadful camps. You see, transport conditions were often lethal and inhumane, without access to food and water, and with the only toilet facilities for long-distance trips being a bucket. The airless transport trucks where the prisoners are crammed in are filled with the aforementioned overpowering smell of vomit, urine, and excrement. Hence, many prisoners died en route to the camps due to dehydration, starvation, suffocation, or illness. You may watch while this happens, or you may be the one being watched by other hopeless souls as you gasp your final breath on the cold floor of the stuffy vehicles. When you arrive at the camp, you're pushed off the vehicle, shoved headfirst into a rather despairing situation. At first, you're led as one big group. Then, the soldiers split you and the other prisoners into two smaller groups of men and women with children. Afterward, you and the other terrified prisoners are subjected to a macabre welcome rite where one of the scary SS guards in tan uniforms barks commands at you, asking to provide your age, occupation, and health condition. As a prisoner who's just been ostracized from society, yanked from the grips of their family, denied access to basic pleasures such as good food and health services, and transported miles without food or water, it isn't unusual that your health might be hardly good upon arrival at concentration camps. Hence, depending on your answers to the questions asked by the SS officer, you're either deemed fit for work when the SS officer points his thumb to the right, or sent to immediate execution if his digit points left. As a prisoner during the Holocaust, the grim reality of having your fate sealed and being condemned to death with a simple gesture from a German soldier was a chilling fate that befell many, including you. The moment those fingers pointed to deem you unfit for work, your heart must have sunk as you realized the cruel destiny that awaited. Hundreds of thousands of Jews who were considered sick, too old, or too young to be of any economic importance in concentration camps faced this same dreadful verdict during those dark times. As you're led away toward the gas chambers, a building designed to be a killing machine, you may kick and fight and beg for mercy. However, there was never a means of escape. Your fate has been sealed by a German soldier whose remembrance of your face is nothing but a fleeting memory. The abruptness of this sentence, the finality of it all, is one final crushing blow to your spirit. What if you survived? Well, you just have to face and somehow endure the horrors awaiting you. After you experience the extremely dehumanizing process of being segregated into groups, surrounded by equally terrified strangers who shared your fate as a Jew and are deemed unworthy to coexist with Germans, you're put through another humiliating process. You're asked to strip yourself of your belongings. Every effect that's connected to your past life has no place in these camps. Clothing, valuables, personal items, everything was taken and piled on a platform, never to be returned. Passing the selection process might have meant escape from gas chambers. However, even that relief is short-lived. After being forced to surrender your possessions, you're dealt blows and pushed along as SS guards attempt to register you into the camp system. Registration means you're given a prison number that instantly replaces your name. In the past, before you were plucked off the street, you were forced to add Israel if you were a male Jew, or Sarah if you were a female Jew, to be easily recognized. However, in this camp, the entirety of your name is taken away, and you're assigned a number instead. The assigning of prison numbers was a deliberate tactic to erase individual identities, reducing you to mere numbers devoid of humanity. Sometimes this number is stitched onto your prison uniform, which is most likely a striped two-piece made out of uncomfortable fabric. Sometimes, especially at Auschwitz, the number is tattooed on your arms, branding you permanently. After the registration process is completed, you're asked to undress in the presence of hundreds of prisoners and the watching guards. There and then, your head is shaved regardless of gender, and you're forced to shower in groups, while SS guards watch you with extreme scrutiny. Finally, you'll be given your prison uniform, one of the few belongings they would allow in their camp. Life in a concentration camp meant you were constantly surrounded by German soldiers placed to herd you like a flock. In a way, you have indeed become a flock, stripped of identity and subjected to the most barbaric treatments possible. The hierarchical structure in many concentration camps mimics the model established at Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp. You'll soon discover that the German staff in your camp is led by the Lagerkommandant, or camp commander, and a team of junior officers. Besides these specially trained officers, there were also male and female wardens to whom you had to respond. Similarly, you'll also discover that prisoners have a hierarchical structure of their own, with prisoner supervisors, or capos, being considered your commander. Every other prisoner outside the capos, including yourself, will be assigned colored triangle badges to identify the reason prisoners were placed in camps and facilitate task assignment. Living conditions in the camps are nothing short of destitute. Soldiers given absolute power by Hitler believed that you and the other Jews deserved no better and thus offered the barest minimum they could spare. This means you'll most likely be assigned to barracks that were designed to hold far fewer people than those that ended up crammed inside. If you're unlucky, your barrack would be run down with problems such as leaking roofs that make life even more miserable and intolerable when it rains. Of course, the guards give you a bed to sleep in. However, these beds are tiny bunks that are typically several tiers high and placed directly on muddy floors. Don't get too comfortable thinking you get a bed to yourself. The limited space available in these camps meant you were required to share your already too small bed with other prisoners. Hence, while the bunks were designed to hold 3 people with 1 person per tier, in reality they hold up to 18 prisoners with 6 people per tier. When there weren't any more bunks to spare, you might have to sleep in tents made out of extremely thin materials, or even worse, damp tunnels without any covering. You're also provided no bedding or blankets beside the straw bedding placed atop your tiny cot. These straw mattresses, if provided, were rarely replaced when fouled with vomit or urine or infested by lice or ticks. As expected of anywhere with such awful sanitation, your barrack will probably be swarmed with lice, rats, or other vermin that facilitate the spread of diseases. Naturally, as one would expect, diseases spread rather quickly in this state. This means you're constantly surrounded by deathly ill prisoners, or worse, you become one. In your barrack, heating came in the form of 2 small stoves, which were nowhere near sufficient for heating entire rooms, let alone the prisoners in them. Sanitation facilities were inadequate, leading to overflowing toilets, constant stench, and once again, the spread of disease. Still, this isn't all. Your daily battle for survival revolves around the constant struggle with hunger and the meager rations provided by the Nazis. The indifference toward your well-being is evident in the paltry meals that are meant to sustain you at a bare minimum, not to nourish or support your health. These meager portions, consisting of watery soup, stale bread, and occasionally a small piece of sausage or cheese, were far from satisfying or nutritious. The mealtimes, if they could be called that, are a stark reminder of the harsh reality of camp life. The gnawing hunger that eats away at your insides becomes a relentless companion, weakening your body, leaving you vulnerable to illness and perpetuating a cycle of deprivation and desperation. The struggle for even the smallest scraps of food become a daily trial, with many prisoners succumbing to the brutal living conditions they were subjected to, despite surviving the initial sorting process. Worse still, you're expected to provide labor in these conditions. The type of work you engage in while held in concentration camps varies depending on the camp. However, you may be asked to perform tasks such as heavy construction, rock quarrying, digging trenches, or factory work. You may also be assigned tasks related to expanding camps, manufacturing armaments, clerical duties, crafts, trades, labor on farms, factory work, mining, or chemical plants. In concentration camps, you're introduced to a life that involves working up to 14 grueling hours per day while being watched like hawks by guards. It becomes the norm for you to get beaten by wardens or capos when you move too slowly or go out of the line of duty without permission. If you manage to survive the living conditions, disease, and hunger, you may end up succumbing to stress and dying from being overworked. Or if you survive those, you're either beaten to death, executed, or sent away as guinea pigs for medical experiments. Inevitably, given the deplorable living conditions, sickness spreads rampantly around you. However, the anti-Semitic regime showed no regard for the well-being of those deemed unworthy of life, denying you even basic medical attention. Minor injuries festered untreated, while grave illnesses became fatal sentences, sealing the fate of many. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis were just a few of the deadly diseases that ravaged the camps, waiting to take you out. The combination of physical hardship, constant fear, and the loss of loved ones takes a devastating toll on your mental state. Depression, hopelessness, and despair become your common companions in the daily struggle for survival. Still, you have no choice but to suffer day after day. Life for the average prisoner held in Nazi concentration camps began with the Appell, a daily lineup that took place unfailingly every morning and evening. Whether it rained, snowed, or was bitterly cold, you and other prisoners are expected to always be present for the Appell. You wake up to the chilling reality of another day in the camp between the hours of 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. every day. The air is heavy with despair, as you and the other prisoners are roughly awoken in the barracks by the sound of a loud gong and capos yelling. As you open your eyes, the harsh reality of your surroundings hits you like a wave of darkness. You were just one among the countless souls trapped in this seemingly eternal hell. It wasn't unusual to find bodies of the many who didn't survive the night laying stiffly in their cramped sleeping positions, mostly ignored by the German officers, although now considered nothing more than husks needing disposal in the eyes of the Germans. These bodies were probably your family or friends, or simply a companion who shared the hard times with you. so you grieve. If you're unlucky, you get to experience Bettenbau or Bettenmachen, which roughly translates to the making of a bed following very strict rules. Following SS guards, you're expected to make your bed. However, given the limited space caused by overcrowding, your weakened physical state due to stress and malnutrition, and unnecessary bed-making regimens set by the SS, you most likely will fail. When this happens, you're beaten, sometimes to death, while other prisoners helplessly watch. In many cases, you knew this person. They could be your neighbor, your doctor, or a local clerk. If you somehow managed to make your bed, you were expected to clean yourself with the dirty water available in the camp, and of course, without access to soap or other toiletries. Afterward, you get breakfast in your mess tin, served by a capo. Dinner is an unappetizing meal of stale bread with watered-down tea or coffee, without the luxury of milk or sugar. On good days, you receive a thin slice of sausage or margarine. Like many things that went on within concentration camps, even the mere act of collecting food was tinged with maliciousness. Sometimes capos single you out as an act of wickedness, throwing your bread in the mud. Sometimes they'll push you, spilling your watery coffee or tea on the ground. When this happens, you either forfeit your meal or pick your muddy bread off the floor, dust it off best you can, and eat. After breakfast, you're expected to respond to the appel or appelplatz, the dreaded morning roll call. Regardless of the circumstances, except for those working far away or in the camp's kitchen, every prisoner was required to assemble for this daily count. Even the deceased were expected to be present, their lifeless bodies lined up at the front of the gathering, a gut-wrenching reminder of the harsh reality of camp life. During the appel, you and your fellow prisoners stood in rigid rows of 10, meticulously counted by the capos under the watchful eyes of the SS guards and officers. Any movement was met with swift and brutal punishment, with soldiers quick to mete out beatings for the slightest infraction. The counting process, often repeated to ensure accuracy, meant you had to endure hours of standing in formation. Sometimes in harsh weather conditions, the physical strain was immense, causing prisoners to collapse out of exhaustion, an action that carries severe consequences. Attempts to evade the appel were met with the same level of brutality, with those caught facing beatings, torture, or even death as punishment. Once the roll call was completed, to the satisfaction of the Nazi soldiers, you were marched off to your assigned work sites on foot, varying in distance from a short walk to several miles. Forced to sing degrading songs for the guards' amusement, you had to maintain a grueling pace under the threat of violence for any perceived disobedience. Falling behind meant severe punishment, reinforcing the constant fear and pressure to comply with the guards' demands. When noon rolls around, you'll be signaled to return to the camp for the afternoon roll call. It's like the morning roll call all over again, a seemingly unending tally where you're expected to stand at attention, this time under the scorching sun and exhausted from all the work they'd done. Afterward, lunch is provided, which is a small respite from the challenging daily routine. This was the norm in the earlier years. However, later the German soldiers arranged for lunch to be taken down to the labor sites to reduce the amount of time spent walking to and from the camp, thereby increasing the amount of time spent working. You're typically released from labor at approximately 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. daily, during winter at sundown. Sometimes you might even be forced to work through the night. However, when work ends in the evenings, you're marched back to the camp for the final roll call of the day. While you may manage to stumble back the distance you walked in the morning, other prisoners who had passed away during duty will be carried back to the camp by your mates to participate in the evening roll call. Once again, inaccuracies were unavoidable, and discrepancies in the number of prisoners counted meant that the roll call could take hours to complete. The process is often made longer as a form of punishment. If you endured the day's ordeal without collapsing from exhaustion or facing brutal punishment, you're granted a meager dinner ration, usually a thin and watery vegetable soup. Once again, the familiar routine of presenting your mess tin or risking going hungry for the night repeated itself, a reminder of the constant struggle for sustenance. Or maybe you wound up in the lesser fortunate camps where dinner is a luxury unknown to the prisoners. In this case, after backbreaking labor, you're sent straight to your barracks, where they're given free time. You and the other prisoners around you might use this free time to barter with each other, trading one item for another that you may need between yourselves. If you manage to get dinner, you're expected to retire to your barrack as soon as mealtime is over. Lights out is typically 9 p.m. in many camps, but it could be later. Once inside your barrack, leaving during the night was strictly prohibited. To ensure no prisoner attempts to sneak out, Blockführers and guards constantly paraded the grounds, keeping their eyes peeled for the sign of a defaulting prisoner. Blockführers were often also called death heads. They wore green triangles on their uniforms, an insignia that meant real criminals. These soldiers had the power to determine your fate. If you were caught outside the barracks during bedtime, they decided who lived and who died as punishment. Retreating to the barracks at the end of the day meant you had managed to survive the hardships of the day. However, it also meant you had to live through these ordeals again the next day. The lack of essential medical facilities and life-saving resources meant that falling sick would lead you to a grim fate. While there were designated sick bays or infirmaries, they were often mere illusions of care and compassion. In some camps where fellow inmates were tasked with running the sick bays, there were valiant attempts to aid you and other ailing companions. However, the overwhelming challenges of rampant disease, horrid living conditions, and severe shortages of medical supplies rendered those efforts largely futile. Many diaries that survived the Holocaust featured prisoners' recounts of healthcare at concentration camps. Regardless of the camps where these diary entries were written, they all share the same experiences as you. The infirmaries, typically stationed in old buildings, like the rest of the camps, had no water, no plumbing, no electricity other than natural lighting, dirty cots similar to those in the barracks, a repugnant straw mattress covered in pus and blood. On each filthy mattress are at least 2 sick people, sometimes looking very skeletal and almost always covered with scabies, boils, devoured by lice, or simply completely naked. In cases where there's a disease outbreak and the sick bays are packed full, it isn't uncommon to find more than 2 sick people sharing a mattress. They lay shivering from cold, suffering and waiting for help, or at least waiting for death. Despite the lousy living conditions that you're in, you hold on to fragile strands of hope. Hope continues to flicker like an undying candle fights gusts of wind. You attempt to live life as you normally would, keeping cultural and religious activities alive. Maybe you keep journals and diaries that detail your throes at the hands of the German soldiers in the camps. Maybe you write about your daily life on scraps of paper, speaking about the degrading conditions you're forced to live in. Maybe you create artwork instead, creating illustrations and drawings that mimic life in a concentration camp. Or maybe you choose to produce jewelry out of copper wire. Regardless what medium you chose, your works, acting as testimonials to a life as a prisoner living in a concentration camp during the Holocaust, are nothing short of a grim reminder of the resilience and humanity that persisted in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Amidst the shadows of despair and suffering, you hold on to fragments of normalcy, finding solace in your faith, traditions, and artistic expressions. Amid such darkness, these small acts of defiance manage to keep your spirit alive and humanity intact. Life in Nazi concentration camps was a routine nightmare for prisoners, with basic rights stolen from you and nothing to call your own except the rough, striped prison uniform on your back. Nazi concentration camps leave prisoners with nothing but the stark reality of survival in a nightmarish experience. Your daily struggle for survival is marked by the relentless brutality of the SS guards, the dehumanizing routines of roll calls that went on for hours, and the constant fear of punishment or death for the slightest infraction. Irrespective of the pervasive darkness that engulfed you and the hundreds of thousands of Jews and other unfairly detained prisoners in the hands of the enemy, you continue to display remarkable strength and humanity in the face of unspeakable horrors. Through your artworks and pieces of writing, you retain shreds of your identities and humanity, despite the Germans' attempts at snuffing out the flame. These stories are haunting narratives that serve as a poignant reminder of the indomitable human spirit, the ability to endure even in the most extreme circumstances, presenting the power of spiritual strength and hope in the bleakest of times. Up until all prisoners were rescued through the combined efforts of Allied forces, the prisoners in Nazi concentration camps endured a living nightmare that tested their endurance, resilience, and general will to survive. Their liberation from the horrors of the camps marked the beginning of the end of a chapter filled with shocking cruelty, loss, and trauma, offering those who had faced the depths of human depravity a silver lining and a hope for a better life. However, even this liberation did nothing to wipe the charred stain from the minds of those affected, as well as the world at large. Following the liberation of Jews from the clutches of Nazi soldiers in concentration camps, survivors were faced with the daunting task of attempting to rebuild their lives, grappling with the trauma of their experiences, and pursuing justice for the atrocities they faced. The legacy of the Holocaust and the sufferings of Jews serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred, uncontrolled bigotry, and inhumanity, urging future generations to remember the past, strive for a world free from such horrors, and seek leadership that works for the freedom and the safety of the innocent. Now check out Real Reason Why Nazi Officers Fled to Argentina After World War II, or watch this video instead.